Welcome to the Bell Gossett podcast, live from the 2020 AHR Expo. I'm your host, Amanda Holloway, joined by Griffin Goda, and throughout the show, we'll have some fantastic guests and topics to share with you in this series, including several of our manufacturers, reps, and Xylem experts. You'll get insights into the trends they're seeing in the HVAC and plumbing industry. Enjoy the show. We're at AHR 2020. I'm here with Mark Handzel. Hi, Mark. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Amanda. It's great to be here, as always.
If you can, just start by telling us what you do for Xylem.
Amanda, my title is Vice President of Product Regulatory Affairs and Government Affairs. So I wear a couple of hats. Product regulations are extremely important to us because they are, basically we want to comply. We want to make sure that we're providing products that meet any applicable regulations, whether it's specifically related to a product or a system design. So my focus in that area is to make sure that Xylem has a voice in the development of those regulations, and once we know what they are, that we work to comply with them. So I think, Amanda, I've done some other podcasts. We've talked a lot about the DOE commercial and industrial pump efficiency or pump energy regulations that just went into effect on January 27th. So, that's an example because it's 8 years in the making that from the day we started negotiating with the DOE to, the actual date when it went into effect. So on the product regulation side, that's a big part of my job. I'll also tell you I go to Europe and I represent us at an organization called Europump, which is the European Pump Manufacturers Association. And, I'm sure we'll get more into Europe, but Europe is the hotbed of product regulation and system regulation right now. On the government affairs side, completely different set of responsibilities, but Xylem is an enormous corporation, and we're still a very young corporation, having only been formed in 2011. So my responsibilities there are to basically travel to Washington and Brussels and places like that and make sure elected officials know who Xylem is, what we do, how we do it, to talk about some of the innovative products that we have to help with key issues related to things like clean water and water treatment and water reuse. So, like I said, I wear a lot of hats, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of great stuff. And so, AHR Expo, how many is this for you?
Oh, probably about 25.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the buildings business, so, AHR has always had a real important part of my life. It's a huge focus for us. It's the one national HVAC trade show every year, and it's a great gathering of the industry. A lot of companies use it like we do for many other sidebar meetings, so it's great to have all of our people related to this business in town and all of our distributors and reps and other people that are important to us in this business. So, along with many of our customers' constituents.
And that's what we were just talking about before we started this conversation a little bit, as the ASHRAE group, they have a conference simultaneous to the AHR Expo that you attend.
That's correct. Yeah, the AHR Expo is it's the trade show. But on the other side, and I mentioned all of our meetings. Well, ASHRAE is a standard-setting organization, basically on their own, and so they hold their own technical conference in conjunction with the trade show. And that technical conference is focused on building design, on energy efficiency, on HVAC systems, on plumbing systems. So there are probably 2,000-3,000 people or more attending just the technical conference that goes on in conjunction with the ASHRAE Expo.
Wow. So busy weekend and a busy start to the week.
Well, we never come here knowing that we're going to get as exhausted as we do. Everybody thinks, trade shows are fun, but it is a very busy week, and I think the key thing is that while everyone's in town, you have to take advantage of the opportunity. So, I spent the weekend attending ASHRAE 90.1 meetings. So the ASHRAE 90.1 standard is basically the commercial building energy standard that ASHRAE is I think it's been in existence almost 25 years. But every 3 years they publish a new version of that standard, and the goal is constantly to reduce the energy consumptions in commercial buildings. The goal someday is to be at a net zero building, which is basically means the building produces as much energy as it uses. And, so those are always very interesting discussions, because the ASHRAE members who participate, they have to balance things like indoor air comfort, how good is the air in the building, how comfortable are the occupants, how safe is the water, along with trying to achieve energy reduction. So it's always a very interesting discussion.
So you mentioned the DOE put in conservation standards that went into effect on January 27th, and you said you've been working on that for about 8 years. You've been a part of that process?
Yeah, just because I was very fortunate. One of those things, you never see your career going a certain direction, but when the DOE announced that they wanted to look at regulating pumps, the industry decided it was in our best interest to work together. So in North America, our pump association is the Hydraulic Institute, which has been around for 100 and some years. So it's a long-standing trade organization, and one that Xylem and many other pump manufacturers support. And their previous mission was really focused more on technical standards for pumps. How do you test pumps? What are allowable vibration? Things like that. But when the DOE announced their intention, really they formed a committee and said, we need a different set of people that's going to go talk to the DOE and represent the industry. So I was fortunate to serve on that committee for HI, and I think DOE has always considered HIs. We're a model for them, because we didn't choose to fight them. We chose to work with them. We chose to educate them. We chose to try to make this, what they were trying to do, better than it would have been if we resisted. So, I think it was an interesting experience, sitting in a room with a lot of people interested in that energy standard and working to negotiate and come to agreement on what was feasible, what the industry could do, and what was acceptable for reducing energy consumption.
And Xylem saw this coming, so we were able to take our Bell Gossett portfolio and largely prepare for those regulations far in advance of when they actually took
exactly,
place.
Amanda. Yeah, I think this is one of the benefits of a large company like Xylem. We do business around the world, and because we do business around the world, some of these standards had their origin is in Europe. Europe is very, very focused on climate change being a major concern. They're really focused on changing their economy to address climate change. So they had put regulations in, much like what the DOE did, probably 5 to 7 years ahead of the DOE. And interesting, DOE has a mandate that if there are existing regulations around the world, that they need to try to stay in sync with them. And obviously for Xylem, that was important, because last thing we want is a different standard everywhere around the world. So once we kind of got that insight, we were able to start looking at our products ahead of time and understanding the impact that future regulations would have. And you're exactly right. We didn't wait for the regulation to get finished. We launched the redesign. And the beautiful thing today is that if you look, some of our pump models were 20, 25 years old, and the way we design a pump today is completely different from how we designed pumps back then. And we have abilities to use computers for simulation. We have the abilities to use 3D modeling to build prototype parts. So we're able to basically improve the efficiency of all of our models. We didn't just do the ones that were going to be impacted by the regulation.
Right.
We said we're going to redesign the whole platform. I think it has resulted in, as you said, we were prepared for the DOE regulation 3 years in advance of the deadline. The DOE gave the industry 4 years to be prepared, so a lot of people are still actually working on being prepared, even though we're a week past the deadline. But
that's usually how
we were ahead of the game. So
well, that's great. But now what? So DOE, this was like a labor of love for so long, and now we're here. And what future pump energy conservation regulations are in store for?
Well,
North America?
I mentioned I go to Europe and represent us at Europump. Europe is still leading the way on product regulations, and they are continuing to look at pumps as an additional place that they can save energy. So, we're talking to the European Union commissions about future changes to their regulations that I think will eventually be the model for future DOE regulations. So, and just to give you an example, circulator pumps, some of the smallest pumps that we make, but in the big scheme of things, because of the number of those that we sell, the potential energy savings if there was a circulator pump regulation, is greater than the regulation that just went into effect.
Okay.
And there was a DOE working group that focused on circulators and made a recommendation. Just the climate in Washington that has never been put out as a formal rule. So,
okay.
The industry is still allowed to sell standard induction circulators as well as ECM.
Okay.
But Europe, they have a regulation that only ECM circulators can be sold, and they're looking at even making that tougher. They're going to drop down the regulation, make it even tougher. So, that's when I say Europe's leading the way, is that they're pushing the manufacturers for more and more efficient products.
Is it fair to say that Europe is ahead of North America by a stretch in terms of the regulations they have in place now?
I think that's a very fair statement to make. It's politics is a tough subject to get into, and everybody has their own, so I rarely go there, but I'll just say that obviously the decisions that are being made don't always reflect, what's really the general climate. With the climate change issue, I think in the U.S., we're seeing cities and states take action trying to respond to climate change, and federally in Washington, there's very little movement. So I think that's why we're not seeing additional regulations coming forward right now. So.
Okay, that's good insight.
So with the DOE rules that just came into effect this year, is the industry kind of, even if people are slow to adopt it, is there an acceptance of it? Is it like people want to be jumping on board with it, or is there even that kind of...
Well, Griffin, I think the key thing is that, first of all, the manufacturers have to comply. Their products have to comply. But one of the things that we worked really hard with the DOE to educate them is that there are far more ways to make a pump system more efficient than just focusing on the pump efficiency. And so that's where, we look at the pump, motor, and drive. It's the true system. And, I think they're... and this is one of the things like with ASHRAE that we mentioned earlier, that ASHRAE has codes that dictate in the design of buildings at a certain horsepower you should be putting a variable speed on a pump, especially if it has in an HVAC system that it's a variable load. The demand for cooling changes throughout the day, the demand for heating changes throughout the day. So Europe's looking at mandating that any pump must be installed with a variable speed drive. We're not at that point here in the U.S. And, there's a tremendous amount of energy being left on the table because we're not demanding those type of things.
And I'm sure I'm sure cost comes into factor when, when you're looking at whether or not to put a variable speed drive onto your system or what have you. But, isn't the potential energy savings from a dollar standpoint there when you're looking at things like ECM motors and...
absolutely, it's there, Amanda. First cost in a construction project is always, the first cost is a demand anywhere. Everybody has a budget. I can spend this much money, and let's just say that typically in the construction process, the building gets designed in a pristine, energy-saving, culture, but then when the true cost of reality of building the building come through, there's pressures on the money that's available, and it forces changes to be made. And a lot of times, some of the first things that go are those energy-saving features that were in the original design. So, the thing that's beautiful that's happening in the market, with a pump, you always have to wait to turn it on electrically. You have to have, whether it's a magnetic starter, you have to have a disconnect for safety purposes, and the bottom line is that variable speed drives are getting so inexpensive today that the electrical cost of putting a drive in is about the same of cost of putting in the other way of starting that pump and disconnecting. Drives always have a disconnect built in, so it's there. So I think that's just an example that the costs are getting so even in line that you can go either way. And but when you factor in what the energy savings of the drive can bring for the life cycle of that product, it gets omitted because it's extra costs. We'll do that later. Well, most of the time it never happens. But so that's, I think, kind of some of the things that we're trying to talk about. And I think it's also really important to note that the fact of life in a building design is that every piece of equipment in a building has a safety margin or a safety factor that's put on it. Just everyone's always concerned the last thing you want is to not have enough cooling in a particular room or not enough heating. So you put a little safety factor on it. Well, a lot of times that means the pump is oversized. And, ASHRAE 90.1 actually has language that says when the system is installed and they balance it, which balance the flows and where it's going, they basically stipulate the pump should be disassembled and the impeller should be trimmed to the correct diameter to match the actual flow and head requirements of the system. So think about this, okay? You just bought a new car, and we want you to take it in the mechanic and have the engine disassembled. Okay, would you really be interested in doing that?
No,
not exactly.
So
So I think the bottom line reality is that that might have been a solution to how to address this over-design issue, the safety factor issue, but it's not very effective in pulling it out. Well, another way you can look at a variable speed drive, it will adjust the speed of the pump to that system demand. So it's an automatic impeller trimmer in many ways. So that's where things get overlooked, and when you don't put that system in that way, you don't get that benefit.
So can you clarify something for me? Because
Sure.
sometimes I get confused on this topic. But so ASHRAE, they put together codes.
Yep.
Are they're not the same though as federal regulations, right?
Great question.
You can't,
yeah. Well, so ASHRAE, a lot of ASHRAE's recommendations are design recommendations. So they're not law, they're not code. 90.1 is unique, okay? Because 90.1 is focused on energy, actually the way the process works, ASHRAE takes 3 years to develop the next version of 90.1. They actually turn it over to the DOE, and the DOE basically reviews the changes. And so the 90.1 committee, they actually put a number on it. They say the newest version 90.1 is going to save 1.6% of building energy, and the DOE confirms that. When the DOE confirms it, basically it becomes building code for any new federal buildings being constructed.
Okay.
And they put it out to the states, and they highly recommend that states adopt it as their building code. It takes a long time for that to trickle down and get all the way implemented. If there's maps out there that will show you that some of the states are 9 years behind in adopting the next version of ASHRAE 90.1 as their code, but there is a process to link it to building code. Amanda, is the point. So, but you're absolutely right. Most of ASHRAE's other activities are not ever code implemented. They are just clearly design recommendations for consulting engineers.
Oh, that's really helpful, because I think people just automatically assume that if it's ASHRAE, then it's law. And,
right. Yeah, and I have to say, looking at the entire pump industry, there's not an organization like an ASHRAE anywhere else in the pump industry. There's not somebody focused on energy conservation who's looking at other types of applications for pumps. So it's very unique. In those meetings that we had with the DOE going back when we first started negotiating the large, the commercial industrial pump standard, the DOE says, well, why don't you more closely control how pumps are designed in systems? And we can't do that because we give our technical information to consultants and we let them design the system as they feel it's appropriate. But DOE just couldn't understand, well, why don't you tell them they can't overhead, put that safety factor on? And it's just that's not the way the industry works.
Sure.
So, but they were very interested to find that ASHRAE 90.1 existed and wanted to know, were there other codes like that that could be pushed to put more types of things that would drive energy consumption in pumps.
On our show, In the Field with Gould's Water Technology, the latest series covers tips and trainings for small business owners. Listen to all 5 episodes of the Small Business Toolbox series wherever you get your podcasts. So you talked about Europe a little bit. Are there other regulations like in Canada that you work on, or do they kind of adopt what, is it more of a North American thing?
Yeah, I mean, Canada adopted the exact United States Department of Energy regulations for commercial industrial pumps.
Oh, okay.
So they took a long time to do it. They didn't announce it until June of 2018. And they put an additional requirement in that the DOE doesn't have, and that's that they wanted a third-party firm to certify that all pump manufacturers are properly testing properly calculating efficiency, properly reporting their PEIs, which is the DOE performance metric. So, Canada's law went into effect last week. We're still working on that third-party certification. We know our pumps comply. We actually jumped on board a Hydraulic Institute program to get our lab certified. So we're actually working the same firm that certified our lab to certify our data for Canada. So it's just because Canada got a late start that it isn't done yet. But Canada has given most of the pump industry an extension because we're all scrambling to meet their deadline. But again, the product's there. But it's actually another good thing for all of our customers and users, because now we're all going to have a third-party firm saying, yes, they did test the pump right. Yes, they did calculate their numbers correctly. So it's always good to have Big Brother or somebody looking over your shoulder.
Watchdog.
Yeah, exactly.
So, in the absence of regulations, what can specifiers, pump specifiers do to conserve pump energy?
No, I mean...
Or building owners.
I think this is the educational opportunity that every member of the Hydraulic Institute has, and every pump manufacturer. Basically, we all know that we have ways to make systems more efficiently, and so it's an educational process. It's obviously ASHRAE helps. We do a lot of technical seminars. Amanda, you're very familiar. You know the Little Red Schoolhouse. That we work very, very hard to educate consulting engineers on proper system design and ways to save energy. So, I think a lot of these things that I've mentioned, that before they come a federal rule, we're talking about them, we're educating, we're trying to make sure people know that they can do things beyond what's required. And so that's really the process right now. Eventually the rules will catch up, but in the meantime, making sure people know that there is another option, there's a different way to do things, there's technology is advancing. I'll give you an example on the circulator product. Even though there is no regulation requiring us to sell a high efficiency circulator, the industry has agreed that we're going to start putting an energy rating label on our circulator products. So it will be, most of us are familiar, like when we buy a washer or dryer, and it's got that Energy Star label. So it isn't Energy Star, but it's a label that looks very like that. It shows where does this pump fall and what's available on the market, what's the least consumptive and the most consumptive. So again, just another way of putting it out there, saying, well, that high efficiency circulator might cost a little bit, but look at how much energy it saves the owner of the building or the consumer. So it's just another way that we can continue to educate. And like I said, we do education. Many other pump manufacturers do. Certainly the Hydraulic Institute is out trying to educate people because of our focus on pumps and HI. So lots of different ways to learn tips and techniques.
And you think, I guess, you look at PLEV, which was introduced, something that Bell Gossett introduced, I think a couple years ago now. And that seems like it was a voluntary thing, but it was meant to really enhance people's understanding of efficiency in the system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, our effort with PLEV a couple years ago was really just trying to educate the industry that, sure, you pick a pump at a design point, which is really the maximum load that you ever expected to have to pump. But really, like I mentioned, because of HVAC systems, they're variable load, the pump doesn't stay at that point. It's like you bought a car that can drive 100 miles an hour, but you don't always drive it at 100 miles an hour. So the PLEV was a load profile that really reflected this is how your system typically operates. So you're not getting just one efficiency, you're getting basically a blended efficiency. And so we made an effort to educate the industry that sure, best efficiency point is important in selecting your product, but realistically, PLEV really helps you understand, well, this is really the blended efficiency that I'm going to see from that product. And Amanda, when we redesigned our pumps, you're familiar, we really focused heavily on what we call efficiency islands. And efficiency islands, again, modern design techniques are amazing. We probably sacrificed best efficiency, but what we got instead with efficiency islands is a tighter band of higher efficiency. And when you look at something like PLEV, that means the pump operates in those higher bands more typically than it would if it was just trying to hit that best efficiency. So PLEB, efficiency islands, all these things, they all come together, but really it's a reflection that Bell & Gossett designed their pumps to operate in variable load conditions and to provide the owner of that pump the most efficient operation possible, because we know it's going to vary in where it's with the fluid that amount that it's pumping. So it's a long, complicated story, and I think if there's anything I've been doing over the last year is out educating people on the DOE commercial pump energy conservation standard. And I get that question a lot. Well, what do I need to take away from this? Well, the biggest takeaway is the DOE has their own new metric, PEI, and so we educate pretty hard. What does PEI mean? How's it calculated? What do I need to know about it? But the bottom line is the engineer's job and the way he picks pumps and the importance of PLEV and efficiency islands, that hasn't changed a bit with the DOE's rule.
Well, that's good.
No, it is good. Yeah, but DOE has requirements. For example, every one of our pump now has to have PEI on the nameplate.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a requirement, and we're meeting that. All pumps we're shipping have it. We have to show the PEI, the pump energy index, on performance curves. So all that information's out in front of the engineering community, and really the education effort was to make sure they knew, well, what is PEI? What does it mean for me? And that's a lot of what we've done on the education side. Yeah.
In addition to energy regulations impacting the pump industry, are there any other regulations or standards to be aware of?
I think some of the biggest concern these days are about water quality. So I think the focus on ensuring building occupants of having clean, safe water is a very important process. Certainly, there's been a lot of press lately about Legionella.
Yeah.
And Legionella it's a nasty stuff. And the bottom line is that it forms in stagnant water that gets extremely warm, over 100 degrees. And so modern building systems are designed, to assure that you don't have stagnant water in a drinking water system. But in a large commercial building that's maybe 30, 40 years old, that wasn't always a criteria that they worried about. So I think that concern about water quality in buildings is extremely important. I think there's also a lot of focus. I know it's in Europe they have the focus, but even here in the U.S. there's a lot of focus on what materials are products made of that might be harmful. Okay, and I'll just give you an example. Lead is something that obviously has been well documented that it's hazardous, particularly to causes a lot of brain impacts, for developing children and things like that. But lead is a very common ingredient in most metal components. It's the beautiful thing about lead is it's very strong, but it actually helps soften the metal. And you might say, well, how is that helpful? Well, every pump part that you get has to be machined, okay? So if that material is super hard, it's very difficult for us to machine it. We go through a lot of machining tools faster. So very, very small amounts of lead are added to a lot of metal components. And right now, federal standards allow us to do that. There is a federal description of what lead-free is, and it's not lead-free. It allows a very, very small portion of lead, but there are existing regulations that, Europe is probably going to lead the way, but they are going to ban the use of lead. And so, I think the industry probably hasn't quite started to focus on that because, it's just not right in our face yet. But I think, that's a coming standard that impacts that water quality that we will all have to address. And by the way, it's not just pump manufacturers, it's valve manufacturers, it's pipe manufacturers. So anybody that has anything to do with the process that involves metal material. Okay.
Well, that's really interesting.
And I'll just say that there is focus in Washington on lead. It's not particularly in metals like in pumps. Many older homes were constructed with lead lines that come from the city water main to the house. And so a lot of communities are looking, how do we get rid of that? And it's very, very costly, and I think that's why Washington's having to step up and provide low-interest loans and help water municipalities address that. So it's not just buildings, it's even broader.
I mean, that's an issue nationwide and has been for years. And
Yes, that's correct.
Just rebuilding the entire infrastructure around water systems. I mean, that's why you have water main breaks and
exactly.
Giant, what do they call them?
Yeah, and I think water infrastructure is a topic that I get more into on my government affairs side of my responsibilities. And I think the positive thing about water infrastructure is there is a general recognition, regardless of political affiliation, that water infrastructure is critically important. And it's about assuring clean water at a reasonable price for all residents of the United States, but it's also about clean water leaving wastewater treatment plants so that we're not polluting the environment. So there's lots of different angles to it, but I think that's what helps resonate with Xylem when I go to Washington D.C. and is that clean water is of interest to just about everybody that we talk to.
Sure. Well, it's been a really interesting conversation, Mark. Thanks so much for coming out this morning.
No, it's always a pleasure, Amanda, and greatly appreciate everything you're doing to get the word out, and thank you again.
Love to catch up with you again sometime soon.
Very good. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
The Solving Water podcast is produced and distributed by Xylem, a global water technology company of more than 16,000 employees committed to solving critical water and infrastructure challenges worldwide. Stream, download, and subscribe